So my name is Emily Kalambaheti. I'm actually a clinical neuroscientist. So one of the things that I do is try to find different ways that we can get brains to function optimally. You know, one of the things we're looking at here today when we're talking about church safety and, you know, the possibility of having violent individuals, healthy brains don't hurt others and healthy brains don't hurt themselves. So if we can identify these people that maybe just need assistance and then point them in the right direction, there is so much that we can provide as a community and as a church in faith and with prayer. And God's given us a lot of other tools too. You know, so we're going to talk a little bit about what those tools are today. When we're talking about faith and mental health, I know, you know, I even have had like bracelets before. This is like, just give your anxieties to God. And I like the thought of that, of like, when you're worried, pray. And when you're hungry, you can pray for food, but then when food gets provided, you eat it, right? Like, you don't pray when you're hungry and then your stomach just gets magically full. God provides. So when you're praying for assistance, see the assistance and take the assistance that you need. I want to, you know, just help break down that stigma that mental health challenges, anxieties, depressions, dark thoughts, it's not a character flaw. It's not a lack of faith. Sometimes there really can be pathologies going on in the brain that make it harder than it is for maybe the person next to you. So when we're looking at the mental health struggles, you know, they can be overwhelming, but reaching out, finding your church, finding your sense of community, and then maybe even identifying other people in your church that you think might need more is a way to help out. I've heard a lot from my patients, like when we're talking about depression, is it all in my head? Like maybe I'm just crazy. And the thought of people saying, is it all in my head, is a little funny because that's where your brain's at. It's one of the most important organs in your entire body. So is it all in your head? Well, yeah, because your brain's in your head. It's not because it's not real. It's because that's where one of the most important organs in your entire body lives. Just a moment ago from the last speaker, we were talking about that fight and flight, freeze, and fawn response. Well, that's all part of the autonomic nervous system, which lives in your brain stem, which is a part of your brain, a part of your central nervous system. And when it's controlling your actions or influencing your reactions, it's not just in the brain. It also goes into your spinal cord, into your peripheral nerves. It makes you sweat more. It changes your blood flow. He had mentioned that feeling of the blood draining out of your body. But when that autonomic nervous system is changing how you're shifting blood, it does that by changing your blood pressure. You ever see someone get so mad their veins pop out in their forehead? It's because that autonomic nervous system is shifting where the blood flow is going. And unfortunately, when you're in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, you shift blood away from the central structures like your brain, but also like your bladder, which is why you can get so scared you wet yourself, right? So your brain and these central structures get a little less blood so that your big muscle groups can get more blood so you can fight or run or what have you. So yes, it's in your head, but it's also in your body, and it's also physiological. You know, it's just part of how we are created. All behaviors, all symptoms have signatures. So one thing that we look for at Genesis Brain Institute is using tools to identify which brain regions maybe just need a little help, little assistance, a little rehabilitation. Very rarely is it the whole brain. It's usually just key components. And if you can identify, kind of triage and triangulate the brain regions, then you can really create effective treatment plans in a short period of time. So I just wanted to share, this is one of my favorite little parables, when we're talking about, God's tools for healing and really how, yes, having faith matters. It very much matters. I think it's one of the reasons why, the younger generations are having such a hard time is because fewer of them have strong faith. And if we can reinstill that in them, I think we'd be doing a great service. But this little parable, especially here in Florida, it reminds me a lot, but a parable of a drowning man. So there's a man at his house, and he's told that the flood waters are rising, and his neighbors grab a car, and they're like, hey, get in the car. We're going to head out of town. The flood waters are rising. And he says, no, God's got me. I have faith. Well, the flood waters get to the first level of his house, so now he's sitting in the window of his second floor, and a guy comes by on a speedboat, and he's like, get in the boat. The flood waters are rising. What are you doing? And he's like, no. I have faith. God's got me. And then the floodwaters rise, and now he's on a roof. And the Coast Guard comes, and they're like, they had their helicopter, like, grab the rope, come into the helicopter. And the man goes, I have faith, God's got me. And then the floodwaters rise, and the man drowns. And he gets up to the pearly gates, and he's, having a conversation with God. And he goes, God, why didn't you have me? And God says, well, didn't you see the car and the boat and the helicopter and the Coast Guard I sent for you? So sometimes he sends us tools, and we just have to accept them. So here are some tools that maybe are a little lesser known, especially in the realm of mental health and neuroscience. And I like thinking of mental health not really as mental, it's brain health, right? And that's what neuroscience is the study of the nervous system. But it all relates back to the brain. But some things that we can do that might be, not what people first reach for. But one that I really like is neurofeedback and biofeedback. So this is something that we've introduced in our brain fitness labs in schools. And what it is, we're not putting any stimulation into children's brains. We're just giving them feedback on their heart rate, on their brain waves, on their blood flow, so that they can realize, oh, when I feel like this, I can learn these skills to then slow my heart rate down, slow my breathing down, increase blood flow to the front part of my brain that helps me make better decisions. We also do QEEG guided therapy. So this is where I take a brain map, I look at the brain, and I say which areas of the brain are having too much or too little electrical activity, too much or too little connection with the other brain regions. And then I use those maps to create custom programs using some pretty cool tools like EEG guided biofeedback and transcranial photobiomodulation. So just some big words, but basically things that help you better control your brain waves or then increase blood flow to brain regions that perhaps are going a little bit offline or laying dormant. We can also do things like TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. This has been around and FDA approved since 2008. It's a drug-free way to treat depression. You can do accelerated protocols that just takes 5 days. And the research shows 80% success rate in getting people out of suicidal ideation. But I will say us specifically at Genesis, we've had 100% success rate. But I do tend to pair this with a couple other things. But for people that don't want meds, there are options. For people that talk therapy has just become monotonous, there are options. For people that can't give me 3 days a week for 12 weeks, but they can give me 5 days all at once, there are options. There's several other options up there, and I think just to skip past a few, but the vagus nerve is one of the key players in that rest and digest system, and when it's more active, we tend not to have as high of a fight, flight, fawn, freeze response. So we can actually just use a little bit of electricity to increase the part of your brain that helps you feel calm, that helps you rest better at night. Sleep is so important. When you're not sleeping well, it's going to be hard to think clearly in the morning and be emotionally regulated. And then there's things that you probably have heard of. Nutrition, good sleep, exercise, community, having a support system, prayer, and faith. And all of them have a role in our mental health for ourselves and for the children and the next generation. So here's just some little pictures of some diagnostics I do to help me, like I said, triangulate and triage the brain regions that need the most assistance. I'll do that brain map. The fancy term for it is quantitative electroencephalography, and I am a licensed diplomat on the International Quantitative Electroencephalography Board. We just call them Qs in the office, or brain maps, though. It just looks at the electrical activity in your brain. I'll also go through a neuro exam. I'll look at the eyes. I know, like William Shakespeare said, the windows to the soul. Right? The eyes are the windows to the soul. I don't know if I can speak on that, but they're definitely windows to brain function. So vision is a big factor. How can you have a good reaction time if you don't have good vision? And then there's little muscles, or 6 tiny little muscles around each eye, and the nerves for those muscles start in your brainstem, which is the same part that has that autonomic nervous system and the vestibular. So some different really key brain regions there that we can look at by looking at the eyes. You can also look at pupils using pupillometry. And when we're looking at the pupils, we can see, like, are your pupils too big? You're probably prone to light sensitivity and headaches, but it also lets me know that fight and flight system is on overdrive because you're just trying to take in the whole room and keep yourself safe. But then when it's time to tell your brain to calm down at night, are the skills there? Is the brain health there to let those pupils get small again, let you block out light and sleep soundly? We'll also look at your cognition, looking at memory, attention, the ability to filter. the ability to filter out things is called response inhibition. And this is huge when it comes to reactivity. We might all have that first thought, right? Or the last speaker was talking about how changing a reaction into a response. I tell the kids that I work with, I might not be able to change what your first thought is, but you should have enough time, fast enough processing speed that you should be able to control your first action, right? If that's take a step back, if that's take a deep breath, you should always be able to control your first action. And part of that has to do with how quickly we can filter out that gut response, how quickly we can process what's going on. So we check that with our cognitive assessment. And then I look for other things like balance. Chronically being off balance will always make you a little anxious, because if you don't feel safe in your own body, how are you going to feel safe in the world? So this is what I get a look at when I look at people's cute EEGs, or I talk about the brain map. I'm looking at different brain regions that are lit up, right? Overactive in red, underactive in blue. And then from there, I do this over 20 minutes so I can get a summary and just say, well, it looks like your default state is a little overexcitable or overactive in this one brain region, but maybe underactive in another brain region. And these are just the assessments we do. Other things that we have at GBI, we have a psychiatric nurse practitioner, because if you do want meds, that's a fair option. You know, meds work for some people. If you don't want meds, there's other options. And if you want a combination, there are options with that too. We also have an amazing mental health counselor. So having that mental health assessment, deciding, does talk therapy make the most sense, cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, just the different things that a counselor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist can do beyond just prescribing. And when we're talking about health, it's not just brain health, right? There's the social health. Do you have a support system? Do these kids know that they have a support system, that they have a family at church, they have a sense of community? There's that spiritual aspect, that social aspect, and then the psychological aspect, the physiological aspect, which is more the brain, but also the metabolic aspects. You'll actually notice that people that have mold in their homes have higher rates of anxiety. And part of that has to do with a specific type of mold and how it can affect your brain. So metabolic health in terms of blood sugar, mold exposure, different aspects that, maybe we don't work on here at Genesis specifically, but we're actually working on a program for that. But that you would just have your routine maintenance with your primary care provider as well, and make sure, like, metabolically, is everyone healthy? And then there is a ton of research out there. I feel like sometimes when people ask me if I'm if you're a neuroscientist, does that mean you don't believe in God? And I usually challenge them, like, the more you learn about the brain, it's almost impossible not to believe in God. Like, it's so amazing to think that our brains, which are these infinitely complex organs, were created on random chance. I don't know. I just, that doesn't make sense to me. Divine intervention does make more sense to me as someone who has studied the brain and dedicated her life to neurological rehabilitation and neuroscientists. I would say the more I learn about the brain, the more it's obvious that God's out there, and he has provided for us. And there's actually really good research out there about how prayer helps the brain. It's meditative. It activates your prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain that helps you make better decisions. The more blood flow you have in the front part of your brain in a healthy way increases the amount of fuel you have to the neurons that help you with reward and consequence processing, with motivation. So prayer can increase the frontal lobe. It decreases amygdala activity. The amygdala is this teeny little almond or thumbnail sized piece of brain tissue deep in the center of your brain. That's our fear response. And prayer decreases the amount of activity in that part of our brain that would otherwise make us fear or be more fearful. It increases dopamine, which is a neuromodulatory neurotransmitter, and it helps with both social connection, which then leads into more oxytocin, which is our loving neurotransmitter, our neurotransmitter that helps us create bonds with other humans. So when it comes to prayer, and the tools to help you with your mental health, or help those that need it with their mental health, I can talk about all the hard science and the elaborate technologies, but I'd be remiss not to talk about prayer as well, and how that can really affect the brain in a positive way. So just to go over those treatment options, just so you can get some pictures, a little idea for what they look like. I talked a little bit about the TMS. This just activates parts of the brain that are inactive, or it can tone down parts of the brain that are overactive. So you can do this with depression. There's a part of your brain on this left front side that that goes offline. It actually asks for less blood flow when you get more and more depressed, which is why there's that almost depressive spiral sometimes where you get dark and it gets darker. You can just put overlapping electromagnetic waves on that part of the brain and force it to turn on, and it actually helps people get more motivated to then do the things that they know could benefit them, because there's a certain level of almost insensitivity when you tell someone that's super depressed to just smile more or go work out, when like they can't get out of bed, they're not brushing their teeth, and you're saying like, well, if you would just run a 5K every morning, you'd feel better. And it's like, well, yeah, but I don't, that brain region for motivation's physiologically asking for less blood flow. It's not healthy, but you can make it healthier. The other things that we do to help increase blood flow, increase fuel to the brain, is hyperbaric oxygen. Some of you might be familiar with it in the world of scuba diving because it helps with the bends, or in the world of diabetic ulcers because it helps with wound healing. But it actually just promotes healing, whole brain, whole body, just increases the fuel, increases your metabolism, increases rates of healing. So I love doing that with patients as well, just to speed up the process. And photobiomodulation pulls extra blood flow to brain regions. We do it transcranially. And then we have a bunch of different electrical devices that have been FDA cleared, some for depression and sleep, some for anxiety and sleep, some for headaches and migraines, but just different ways to activate the brain in a way that's healthy. And then instead of it being like, an Excedrin where you take it and you feel less pain and then it wears off later, you can actually improve these brain regions. And we actually just added another physician to our staff, Dr. Gleiss, who does a lot of work with exosomes and pain, because it's hard to be emotionally regulated when you're in pain all the time. Pain signals scream inside the brain. They scream louder than proprioception. They scream louder than so being able to shut off those pain signals using different techniques or rebuild tissue so that your bones aren't grinding on the bones, in your knees or in your back, can actually help your mental health, because getting out of pain is good for your mental health. All right, so just wrapping up here. Counseling, medications, the neurotherapies that I've talked about today, supplements and diet, exercise, prayer, and community. These are all different ways that we can encourage each other to have better mental health, and tools that God has provided us. Like I said, we don't pray for food and then turn it down when it comes. We eat, and then that's Him providing for us. He's provided for us by giving us these amazing churches, people that would drive multiple states to get here to talk about church safety. He's put the doctors on this planet. He's given us the tools to train the people that created these inventions. And it's just, they're all pieces of a puzzle, and not everyone needs every piece, but it's good to know what your options are, before there's any large, drastic, can't come back from decisions. Just making sure that there's been no stone left unturned, no treatment option that you haven't tried yet. And then this is another picture of our brain map. So what's pretty interesting is in the anxiety brain map, you can see that red spot right in the center. I'll see that a lot in anxiety. That's a part of your brain called your anterior cingulate cortex. And the more active it is, the more you're like on high alert. And it talks a lot with the amygdala, that fear response area. But after some rehab, we can get that red spot to go away. We can get that overactivity to better regulate. Same with depression, where that left front side's just not very healthy. We can do different treatments to help improve the health of that area. Trauma, even things like ADHD, you can actually make a good effect on by doing things like neurofeedback and helping them feel better in their bodies and better perceive the world around them, so they're not craving as much chaos and as much movement. And over at Genesis, I am most definitely not a one-woman show. I am a single member of a large team. We have an amazing treatment team, administration team, but I do have our providers on the screen right now. Everything from, psychiatry, mental health, anesthesiology, interventional pain, and then, of course, what I do with the neuro rehab. And I guess the big picture today is just that prayer, faith, they're powerful tools for neurological regulation. And I encourage people to seek out a sense of community, to strengthen their faith, to pray. And when you combine that with these neurotherapies, with biofeedback and the extra oxygen and the better blood flow and regulated brain regions, you really can help shift that brain from that fight or flight or that depressed or anxious state into a state of resiliency, mental clarity, and regulation, and ultimately optimal function, because healthy brains don't want to hurt themselves, and healthy brains shouldn't want to hurt others. So, all right, I just wanted a little call to action. Your struggles do not define you. There's many ways God has provided us for healing. And if you are struggling, reach out to someone. Doesn't have to be me, but I'm here if you want to talk. I'm not a counselor, but I might be able to point you in the right direction. But reach out to someone, because you are not alone. Okay, if you ever want any more information, I have our information on the screen. Of course. Yeah, so when it comes to PTSD, you'll actually see the back part of the brain light up on their brain maps, because they'll get visual flashback. So that visual part of the brain, we call it the occipital lobe, will be overactive. And you'll have flashbacks. Even a little stimulation will cause a large response. So you can help that by regulating. Another thing you'll see a lot in people that have PTSD is poor sleep. And there's a really interesting study where they took healthy college kids that had no traumatic events, no PTSD, and they sleep deprived them for 4 hours a night for 7 nights in a row. And they started exhibiting signs of PTSD, the hypervigilance, the misinterpretation of regular signals. So it just goes to show that when you're not sleeping well, you're not going to emotionally regulate. And then you're adding that onto if you actually have experienced a trauma. And that's a very tough recipe. So getting you sleeping better, getting those parts of the brain regulated are big factors. And then I do tell my patients, I can neuromodulate, right? I can use all my tools to help your brain function better. And there's nothing I can do that can erase those memories, that can erase the trauma. And that's where I do strongly encourage mental health counseling. And there's a specific type of mental health counseling that's considered the gold standard for PTSD. And if you want to learn more about it, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, but it's EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it works really well. And if it doesn't work for you, it might be because your eye movements aren't very smooth. So maybe you need a little bit of eye training to better improve your eye movement. So then you can use that system to then improve the symptoms related to the PTSD. What other questions do we have, though? Yeah.
First off, thank you for your time.
Of course.
Mental health in general is very educated in many states, and specific, obviously, because most of us are from Saints Episcopal churches. Mm-hmm. We're specifically talking about the vagus nerve stimulation, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, parasympathetic.
It is parasympathetic to the vagus nerve. Excellent.
So, in a situation where someone is having a psychosis episode, maybe a little service, something like that. Sometimes it's very easy to identify. You don't know what you're looking for, maybe not. But what are some things that we can do to bring them back down to a level in the moment? Obviously, all your services are great, but it has a lot to do with tech and things like that. So specifically, like something like breath or.
Nope, that was the first thing I was going to recommend. Breath work, slow, deep breathing, where you're breathing in for half as long as you're breathing out. So you breathe in for 4 and then out for 8 seconds. Or if that's too much, right, they're like already hyperventilating, maybe in for 2, out for 4. In for 2, out for 4. And when you blow out, you should try to build the back pressure in the lungs by blowing out like you're blowing through a straw. There's other things we do at church that naturally activate the vagus nerve, and that's singing. Anytime you activate the back of your throat, you're activating the vagus nerve, because that's where that innervates. It goes past the back of the throat and then behind your heart and then into your intestines. So when we do our amens and our hallelujahs, you'll feel it in the back of your throat, and it activates the vagus nerve naturally. So encouraging them, like, you don't have to get through the service, but can you get through one more song? You know, let's, you can stay seated, but maybe let's sing together. And if you don't want to sing, maybe we just hum. And humming activates the back of the throat. Like if you hum low and you put your finger against your throat, you'll feel the vibrations. Humming, deep breathing, singing, gargling is another one. Chewing gum, eating food. That's why we comfort eat. You know, the little bit is the emotion component, but another part of it is your brain doesn't think that it's in danger if it's eating, because eating is parasympathetic. So if we're eating something, certainly we must not be in danger, but we do tend to kind of overuse that in our society where we comfort eat maybe too much. But in the heat of the moment, here's a granola bar, here's a bottle of water, do some deep breaths. If you want to gargle, gargle with me. You know, different things like that could be things that you do in the moment to kind of pull them down. But deep breathing is one of my favorites. Absolutely. Very good. If you have, go ahead. We've been working to try to become a community. It's just a longer process than it should be, which is most things in government. So it's definitely on our radar, and we're trying hard to get there. Okay, I think if you have other questions, I'll just be in the back. I know we're going to have lunch soon, but I'm going to pass it back. Jim, thank you very much.